Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Miller. Every week, I chat with fascinating people from all walks of life in order to bring you knowledge, inspiration, and insight. If you enjoy the show, you can support it by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend. This is the Jeremy Miller Podcast. Jennifer Ho, welcome to the podcast. I am super excited to chat with you today.
Hey, Jeremy. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so I think there is so much information out there on the internet regarding diet and nutrition, and who knows where most of this information is coming from. Like, you never know if the person talking about it is credible, where they got the information, what studies they're reading. There's just a lot of information out there. And so I think it's important to talk to somebody like yourself, who is a registered dietitian, a nutritionist, who can kind of weed through all that stuff, especially when it comes to running and fitness, because that's like a whole nother layer on top of this nutrition stuff. And so I'm really excited to dive into a whole bunch of stuff. We have a ton of questions. We did like a Q&A on Instagram. So we pulled a bunch of questions from people, and we'll kind of just go through all those. But before we do that, do you want to kind of just tell people like a little bit about your background with diet, nutrition, and some of your credentials and whatnot?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll start with where it all kind of began. My interest was always in sports and active populations. So initially I thought I wanted to be an athletic trainer and go down that route. So that's what I started my college degree in kinesiology. And it wasn't until probably my junior year where I was kind of like, actually, I don't think I want to do this. But I knew I wanted to stay around sports. So I was just thinking, what other pathways can I go down to keep me in this realm, but maybe not down athletic training? And that's where nutrition came in. And basically just through some connections, I was able to intern with USA Volleyball. They were right by my college that I was going to. And the dietitian there's one dietitian and then two other interns. They were older programs, and they really took me under their wing, and I learned a lot from them. That was pretty much the start of my nutrition path. And from there, finished my 4-year degree and then went to a graduate program in Utah, and did my master's degree there. After that, to become a dietitian, you have to do a 1,200-hour internship and then get basically take a board certification exam. So did all of that, and then worked in other sports settings along the way. And then kind of fast forwarding a little bit, I moved to New Zealand about 8-9 months ago in October, and I've kind of switched to the other side of sports nutrition and working in the supplement side. So it's been really interesting and eye-opening, honestly, because I always thought I had to be around team sports or individual athletes. I never really saw supplements as another path that sports nutrition could take me down. But here we are now, and it's been great. So it just goes to show that if you have an open mind and say yes to opportunities, life will just kind of take you where it needs to take you.
That's amazing. So what is the difference between a registered dietitian and a nutritionist? Because they're two separate things technically, correct?
Correct, yeah. So a nutritionist is really an unregulated name, so anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. You can call yourself a running nutritionist if you want, and you wouldn't really get in trouble. Okay. Granted, you're not giving any like medical information or medical advice out. A registered dietitian is someone who's gone through a 4-year accredited program, and soon they're going to require a master's degree as well. And then our internship and taking the board exam. And then after all of that is done, we still require continuing education units over a period of time. So the learning never ends.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of schooling and a lot of hoops to jump through and steps you got to go through in order to be a registered dietitian. Okay, that's good to know, because I always hear people say they're a nutritionist, and I'm like, I never knew what that meant. So that's good to know that, like, take those with a grain of salt, I suppose.
Yeah. And it's really, there's so much information out there that a lot of it is take it with a grain of salt and ask yourself, like, does this sound right to me? Like, do your own research, look into it a little bit as well.
Yeah, that's one thing I've had come to learn is like somebody could be a very credible, registered dietitian or somebody who has a lot of credentials, and they might say something that totally contradicts another person at the same level, and it's like I don't like who do you believe?
Mhm.
It's just so subjective, I feel like, and cherry picking studies to like fit their
Yeah.
narratives, and it can get really weird sometimes. So it's a very interesting industry. Do you deal with a lot of that stuff like in your day to day, or like I feel like even with the supplement industry, you probably have to deal with a lot of that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I never thought I'd be working with a supplement company when I first started my career. That was one thing that I was like, no, I'm all for team sports, like never going to work with a supplement company. But here we are now. So it's definitely something where, as a dietitian, I'm looking for the research, the science that backs it. And with the amount of information out there and the platforms that we have nowadays to share the information, it's easy for someone to speak very confidently about a topic and have really great marketing and have a really nice video put together. And that's going to be a lot more enticing and believable than maybe what a research article might say. Because realistically, most people aren't going to be like, oh, let me do a quick PubMed search, read through this 15-page article and see if I took anything away from it. So that's kind of how it is nowadays. And you have family, you have coworkers, everyone kind of has a voice with their nutrition, and part of part of their identity too, I would say, is tied to what they eat. And it's it's important to remember nutrition is individual. It's for you, not for the person next to you.
Yeah, that's something I constantly have to remind people of. Like, because I put out a lot of videos about what I'm eating and how I'm feeling for different workouts and stuff. And like, I'm saying this is what I'm eating, not recommending anything to anybody. And then people are always in the comments of like, yeah, this works for you, but it doesn't work for everybody else. And I'm like, that's why I'm not recommending it, is because, I'm telling what I'm doing and take it as you will. Do you have like a good method that you use to kind of sort through the all the junk and get to the bottom of things?
Um, I guess more specifically, are you asking like if someone comes to me and is like, "Is this diet good for me?" Or I guess what exactly are you asking about?
Yeah, like if somebody makes a claim in like an Instagram video or something that says like broccoli's bad for you, for example, like
Mhm.
how would you go about trying to uh, find out if that statement is true or false?
Well, so for me, I mean, granted, maybe broccoli is bad for you isn't the greatest example,
Okay.
because I would typically go to PubMed and see what the research is saying.
Okay.
So I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of articles on broccoli being good or bad for you, but yeah, usually do a little quick PubMed search, see what the research says, and even classmates and colleagues who are also in the field, because we say dietitian, but within dietitian, you have sports dietitians, you have clinical dietitians, you have community dietitians. Within sports dietitians, you have endurance dietitians, you have like gymnastics and like power sports dietitians. There's so many different avenues that you can go down. So really, we can help each other and just bounce ideas off each other, have these conversations, and then come up with an answer together.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so PubMed and then other credible sources through people that you know. Okay, uh,
Yeah.
and I'm not claiming broccoli's bad. Just to make that clear. But um, so what does your day to day kind of look like working for the supplement company? We should tell people what the supplement company is as well.
Yeah, so I'm working for Two Before Performance Nutrition. It's a New Zealand-based startup, and we make a blackcurrant pre-workout powder. And pretty much day to day is different every day. It really depends on what's going on. Some days it's meetings back to back. We're really trying to grow in the US right now. So with time zones, a lot of my meetings are in the morning time because it's afternoon/evening wherever the team in the States. So meetings in the morning and then usually afternoons. maybe reading in more research of for future product development. It may be outreach to other podcasts or dietitians or people to continue continue raising awareness of blackcurrants. The big thing is that blackcurrants aren't really in the States at all, so no
No.
one really knows what they are. So there's that barrier of education of, well, what even is a blackcurrant? It doesn't sound like a berry, but it is a berry. And how does it compare to things that you might find in the US grocery stores? So my role with Two Before is mainly in, and then also communicating with the dietitians in the US, and talking to them about the science and the benefits of the product.
Yeah, I had never heard of blackcurrants until I heard of two before. Because
Hmm.
we definitely don't have them in the U.S. as far as I'm aware. And I've been taking two before for I think like 5 or 6 months now, and I really love the product. I can truly tell a difference when I do take it, and I take it pretty much every day for the immunity benefits, and then obviously for all the exercise and endurance benefits as well. But I definitely want to hear it from somebody like you who knows a lot about the product, who knows about the science behind the product, rather than just like my anecdote. So if you want to maybe just like run through like some of the science and the benefits of the product.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Two Before has really two main benefits relating to performance. That's going to be your endurance benefits and then recovery benefits. And breaking down endurance even more, talking about vasodilation, so increasing blood flow to your working muscles, and then with recovery, helping your body helping your body prepare for the exercise induced stress. So with these berries, they have a unique balance of anthocyanins, which are basically antioxidants. And what that balance does is that it puts a mild stress on your body so that your body turns on your immune system. And when you're exercising, when you're putting that stress on your body, your immune system's already ready for that stress. So you're essentially having a so taking it before you exercise, but for your recovery after exercise. And that is one of the main mechanisms behind the benefits relating to recovery and immune health.
So would you recommend taking two before prior to a workout? Obviously, is that the optimal way to use it?
Yeah, the optimal timing will be 30 to 60 minutes before.
Okay. Um, and what does the science say about two before? Are there like studies specifically on? Have you guys done studies with the product itself, or is it more on like the powder or the berry itself, or what does the science kind of look like?
Yeah, so the product was actually born from a research institute in Auckland, New Zealand, called Plant and Food Research Institute. And essentially, the researchers there were just studying the native berries around New Zealand and kept finding that blackcurrants stood out from the rest of them. And I want to say they were testing blackcurrant extract. And they just kept finding the benefits out of blackcurrant extract. And then from there, they're like, how do we make this into a product? And that's how 2 before was created. So the dosage of the anthocyanins in 2 before are specific for those benefits that I talked about earlier, for the vasodilation, for the recovery benefits. And we have a lead researcher who has really been doing this for the last 15 years. So it's really cool to see something go from just a matter of interest to we need this product out to the people. Like, how do we do this?
Are there other berries besides black currants that offer the same benefits, or offer just as many benefits?
Good question. Black currants, and specifically the ones grown in New Zealand, are pretty unique because the climates and the UV exposure that the berries are grown in only found in New Zealand. So you might hear black currants are from Europe or from Canada, but those berries aren't grown in the same conditions that the New Zealand ones are in. So they've they've done studies to see what the anthocyanin content looks like across different kinds of black currants. So European, Canadian, New Zealand black currants. And the New Zealand berries always had the highest amount of anthocyanins and that unique balance. So it is really special and really unique to the New Zealand blackcurrant.
Interesting. Can people just eat the berries if they wanted to get the same benefits, or is it have a difference when it's like in a powderized version?
So the main thing is the dosage of the anthocyanins. So with that 120 milligrams, with each packet of 2 before, it's guaranteed to be in that serving. Whereas the berries depends how many are you eating, where were they grown, where did they come from, things like that. So there's a lot more variables that go into if you're getting the recommended dosage for those performance benefits.
Okay, so you're definitely better off just taking the powder basically because you know exactly how much you're getting and you know the timing of it, all that stuff. Okay. Um,
Exactly, yeah.
so to kind of go into some other questions, like I know there's just a lot of quote unquote like snake oil stuff within the supplement industry. What
hmm
is your overall take on supplements? I know there's a million different supplements out there. Like, do you feel like there are some that do work and are beneficial? Do you think there's some that you could avoid? What's your take on that stuff?
Yeah, I would say before even considering supplements, ask yourself if your diet is good, because that's really going to be your foundation. Are you eating what you need to eat to fuel your exercise? Because are just supplements can just put a band-aid on some of your fueling errors. So ask yourself first, what am I eating? Is that enough? And then look into supplements. Because as the name suggests, it is to supplement your diet, not to replace a part of what you're eating. So that would probably be my main takeaway for supplements.
Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, I feel like people forget what the word supplement means sometimes, and I've been there where it's like, you know, oh, I missed an entire meal today. I'll just have a protein shake, and it's like, I mean, that could work some days, but like some people do that every day, or like they
Mhm.
just think that, oh, I don't eat any fruits or vegetables. I'll just take like some powders, and that'll that'll do what I need to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I like to think of it as like insurance basically on your diet is like I think you could describe it perfectly. Just make sure your foundation is good and you can kind of fill the gaps with supplements.
hmm
What are some supplements you would recommend to people like say they have a really, really good diet, they're checking all the boxes with whole food, real food. What are some supplements you would maybe recommend to somebody, if any?
Yeah, it really depends. If we're talking runners specifically, we're talking general population. If we're saying general population, I like to say vitamin D is always a good one to look at because we synthesize it from the sun, but say if we're in the winter months or you're indoors a lot, you're not going to be synthesizing as much. And it's not naturally found in a lot of foods either. So vitamin D is always one that I'd recommend. And then for females, especially iron, and female runners, especially
Mm.
iron, is always something good to look at. So I would say those two just like general health and well-being. If we're talking about athletes and performance, that's when we might look at electrolytes. If you're a runner, if it's hot outside, if you're running for a while, we might look at creatine if we're trying to get more gains in this from the strength side of things in the gym. Um, and it's really individual and depends on what that person's goal is. But like I said, you can achieve a lot through a proper diet and a solid foundation. And then from there, it's like, okay, what gaps are we trying to fill and what supplements can help us get there?
One thing I really wanted to talk about was sodium or electrolytes in general. I feel like
hmm
sodium specifically has been so demonized, like I don't know, like by big pharma or big food, whatever you want to call it, and like everything's low sodium, and like people, are always talking about making sure you have a low sodium diet. Yet I hear a lot that most people are actually deficient in sodium. Typically, if they eat like a whole foods diet, I think, because it's it doesn't have all the preservatives and stuff in it. So, what is your take, or what's your opinion on sodium and electrolytes for even, let's do the same thing like for the general population and then for an athlete or somebody who's trying to optimize their performance?
Great question. I feel like the messaging towards general population about sodium and diet often gets muddled with the recommendations for your elite and active populations. And it's really two different sets of recommendations. So if we're talking general population, yes, there's going to be a lot more low sodium recommendations because generally people are eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of packaged frozen foods, and those are going to be higher in. It's highly unlikely to be eating too much sodium just from the table salt that you're shaking on your food to season your food. It's more from the packaged ones that need the salt to stay in a decent quality as it's on the shelf at the grocery store.
Okay.
Now,
Oh, go ahead.
does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Definitely.
Awesome. So for the active population, you're sweating a lot, you're losing a lot of sodium through your sweat. If that sodium isn't replaced, that can cause some symptoms like symptoms of dehydration, like lack of mental clarity, fatigue, cramping, things like that. So sodium is important for your athletes because as they're sweating, as they're working out, they're losing a lot of it through their sweat. Now, within sweat and sodium replacement, that's also very individual because some people are heavy sweaters, some people are heavy sweaters and salty sweaters, and that is all individual. So it's really find what works for you in terms of electrolyte amounts, and electrolyte amounts and fueling for your runs. But it's important to remember that your active population is going to have different recommendations than your general population.
Okay. I actually just did a sweat test this morning. I haven't got the results back yet to find out about the sodium content in it, but I did the math just on my own of like how many liters
Mm-hmm.
of sweat. I've never actually like weighed myself before and after a run like that. And it was a speed workout, so it was like a really intense, like 75 minutes. And I think it was almost like 3 liters, I want to say, or it was 2 or 3, like within an hour or 75 minutes. I was like, oh my gosh, like it was almost half a
Yeah.
gallon of sweat that I lost. And yeah, I think for athletes and runners especially, like I feel like so many people are deficient in that stuff and in
Mm-hmm.
electrolytes and hydration as a whole. Um, is there a certain timing that people should strive for when it comes to intake of electrolytes for running?
So the timing of electrolytes really depends on how long you're going for a run and environmental conditions as well. Is it really hot outside? Is it really cold outside? What's the humidity like? So if we use an hour run as an example, you do want to have electrolytes before, during, and afterwards. Before is to help your body be in a hydrated state when you're running. During is to help replace the sodium that you're losing through your sweat. And then after is also to help replenish all the sodium that you've lost through your sweat. Now, it really comes down to how much as well. And you'll see electrolyte products ranging from 200 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams. And like I've been saying for most of this podcast, very individual. So knowing if you're a salty sweater, if you're a heavy sweater, are you going for a long run? Is it really hot outside? All those factors to consider when you're picking a electrolyte product.
Is there a difference, in your opinion, or what does the science say, I suppose, of or between sodium citrate, real like sea salt or Himalayan salt, and then something like
Mm-hmm.
sodium chloride? Because I've seen all three of those different forms of salt in electrolyte products, and I have no idea if one is better or worse than the other.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with sodium citrate. I feel like I mostly see sodium chloride on products, and our table salt is actually sodium chloride. That is like the chemical chemical structure, I guess, of it. So sodium and salt are the same exact thing.
Okay, and then do you know if there's any benefit at all to or a difference at all between like like iodized salt, which I guess that's sodium chloride, versus like Himalayan salt or sea salt?
Not that I'm aware of, and I don't think that's a detail that most runners should get too caught up on.
Okay. And the reason I asked was because somebody was telling me that I think it was an ultra runner was saying that there's some GI difference. I don't, again, who knows if this is
Mm-hmm.
true or not, but a GI difference between like, he was talking about sodium citrate, which I'd also never heard of, compared to like real salt. So I was just curious on that. But it sounds like it's a very minuscule detail to worry about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, it's all individual. If you find that sea salt works for you and Himalayan salt is for some reason upsets your stomach, use sea salt.
Perfect. One of the questions we got a lot of questions about this actually, was running while fasted, or waking up in the morning, you've been fasting for 8, 12 hours and then running. Would you recommend that? Are there any benefits to that?
Great question. Initially, I would always say or always think, don't do a workout fasted. But I recently listened to a podcast maybe a month ago that actually talked about that and kind of opened my mind a little bit about it. I think it's important to ask what intensity you're running at. So if you're staying zone 2 or lower, so pretty easy running, then, and also distance wise, um, sorry, let me start over.
You're good. You're
Jumbling
good.
my words. So we want to consider intensity of your run and then also distance of your run. So say if you're going for pretty low intensity an hour, you'll probably be fine staying fasted. But it's when you get into those really high intensity runs or you're running for a long time, that's when your body's going to need the carbohydrates, that quick energy sooner. Our bodies do use fat as energy. However, it's a lot slower and less efficient to turn into working energy for our muscles to use. So whenever you hear someone say carbs give you energy, it's because they are broken down quickest and most efficiently by our body so that our muscles can use them instantly.
Okay, perfect. That is reassuring to hear, because that's exactly how I train. Is I anything under usually I do anything under 90 minutes. I'll do it fasted,
Mm-hmm.
and just an easy effort. And then if it's a workout or over 90 minutes, that's typically where I'll have something before or during the workout. So that's reassuring to hear. And I think
Yeah.
for a lot of people too, because I think that seems to be what most people do. I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is there benefit, do you know, to intermittent fasting while, say, training for a marathon?
I wouldn't say there is any special benefit of intermittent fasting for a marathon. I don't know if it would really help at all. Just from general speaking about intermittent fasting, I always say if it doesn't work for your schedule and your day, it's probably not going to work for you. So if you're up at 4 or 5 a.m. running and you have a 5 hour, or sorry, an 8 hour window, that brings you to what, 4 or 5 p.m. and you're supposed to eat dinner at that time and then not eat for the rest of your day and then wake up and do the same thing over again, you're probably not going to feel super great. So I wouldn't recommend intermittent fasting specifically for running.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. What would be for you? What do you think an ideal meal would be for somebody before like a speed workout or like a long intense run or a race even?
Hmm. So all of those would warrant different fueling
Right.
schedules, but let's just say general workout, um, just a normal training run. 30 to 60 minutes beforehand, you'll want to have some simple carbohydrates and about 30 to 60 grams of that simple carbohydrates. So that could be a banana, that could be a slice of toast with peanut butter and a banana, it could be a few graham crackers. If you're training really early in the morning and you just don't have an appetite at all, that's where energy chews, sports drinks can come in handy because they're really simple sugars and your body breaks them down easily. You want something low in fiber because that will slow down your digestion. And when you're running, when you're active, you don't want your blood to be going to your stomach. You want it to be going to your working muscles. So simple carbs, 30 to 60 grams of those, 30 to 60 minutes before you run.
That's perfect. That's simple enough to remember, I think. Um, what is the difference between simple and complex carbs? I hear people talk about that a lot. I kind of have an idea, I guess, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Yeah, so simple carbohydrates, as the name suggests, are simple and easily broken down by our body. So we're thinking our white bread, white pasta, pretzels, what else? Applesauce, things like that. Complex carbs are going to be a lot more fibrous. So whole, I almost said whole meal because that's what it is in New Zealand, but whole wheat, whole grain options, your potatoes, or sorry, sweet potatoes are a little more complex than white potatoes, foods like that. And really, you need both of them, but there's a time and place. So this also is where the general population nutrition recommendations gets muddled with your athletic population because usually white bread is like the worst thing in the world to a lot of people. But for your active individuals, for people who are running a lot, needing a lot of that quick energy, white bread is going to settle in your stomach a lot nicer than wheat bread. So, say if you are eating within that hour before or after exercise, you're going to want to opt for those simple carbohydrates because that's what's going to sit in your stomach better. That's what your body's going to break down quicker. Whereas outside of your training, say you're having lunch 3 hours later, or you're eating a meal 3 to 4 hours before you run, that's where the complex carbohydrates come in because they give your body fiber and that helps with our gut health and our gut microbiome.
Okay. Okay. So complex carbs, the further out from the run or after the run, and then simple carbs before. Is there a, I apologize if you just mentioned this. I don't think you did, but is there um, benefit to like just like cramming in a bunch of simple carbs right after a workout to like refuel the glycogen in your muscles? I've heard a lot of people will do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a key piece to recovery nutrition. There's often a lot of emphasis on protein, but carbohydrates are needed just as much for exactly what you just said. We're using our glycogen stores during our runs, during our exercise, so we want to replenish them so that you have energy throughout the rest of the day and for your next run. So, generally speaking, a 3 to 1 carbohydrate to protein ratio. If it's an even longer run or a higher intensity, that might look like 4 to 1. So, say if you're having 20 grams of protein, 60 to 80 grams of carbohydrates to go with it.
Interesting. I hear everybody talk about protein following a workout, but I feel like I've more recently heard people talking about carbs after a workout, but I feel like nobody ever talks about carbs. Or at least I feel like I never used to hear people talk about carbs following a workout. Okay, that's a good tip. I think this is a good segue into what like the most popular question we got on the Instagram poll I did, and that is regarding the animal based diet versus like vegan diet. Are either one of them sustainable if you're marathon training, and are either one of them good at all?
Well, it really depends on your lifestyle and what makes you feel good. I always say the best diet for yourself is the one that you can do for the rest of your life and it makes you feel good. So not something that you're doing for 30 days or 8-week challenges, but something that you know that you can keep doing for the rest of your life. So when it comes to say a more plant-based or a vegan diet, you can absolutely do that as a marathon runner, but there's some more key nutrients that you want to be aware of so that your bones and your muscles are still looked after. So, those being calcium for your bone health. Usually that comes from dairy products, but for vegans, obviously there's not going to be dairy. So, you'll want to look for soy products, tofu, fortified milks, products like that. And the other nutrient would be protein intake as a vegan. A lot of protein may come from beans and nuts and seeds. So those are mixed with fats, those are mixed with carbohydrates. So it's not really a pure protein source like, say, chicken or eggs. So being strategic with protein intake. so that you are getting enough to recover your muscles and be ready for your next training bout. And I'd also even add in omega-3s just for inflammation. So eating your walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, getting omega-3s through your nuts and seeds for inflammation as well. And then I guess if we're going to talk about the animal-based diet, just so that we're all on the same page, talking about the same thing, mostly meat forward, some fruits, pretty low vegetables, and carbohydrates. Fill me in. What's your take on the carbohydrates and how they fit in with the animal-based diet?
I think again, it's very subjective to
Yeah.
whoever's doing it, but because I generally follow that diet, and so what I do, it's like meat, fruit. I don't count carbs or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that. But the vast majority of carbs come from fruit, and then some from like dairy products, like milk or cheese, and then eggs. So I don't think eggs have carbs, but that's like the majority of what I eat, or what I think most people would consider the animal-based diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that, just being strategic around your training and making sure that you're getting enough carbohydrates to fuel your training, and then having that protein after your workout alongside those carbohydrates so that you're getting all of your macronutrients. It's really just a timing thing versus just, I feel like people kind of throw these diets out and just don't think about where these foods are eaten throughout the day, especially in relation to their training and their exercise. So you're not going to be eating steak 30 minutes before you run. Like you're probably going to feel awful if you do that.
Right.
You're going to want to have those simple carbohydrates, a banana, slice of toast, things like that. In terms of the diet being low in vegetables, with running and with being highly active, we still want to have our vegetables for the inflammation management side of things, but we don't want to be eating vegetables right before your training because those are very fibrous, will slow down your gut. So there is timing to go with the vegetables as well. There's no harm in eating vegetables outside of training, just for overall health and well-being. I don't think that any food group should really be like demonized or labeled good or bad, but really the idea is thinking big picture and timing. How do these foods fit into my diet according to what my training goals are, what my training plan is?
I hear people talk about plant defense chemicals a lot. Have you heard of this?
I'll be honest, I had to do a quick search to see what that even meant.
Does it? I mean, from my understanding, it's like, I guess I don't know the science on it, but just from what I've been explained, or what's been explained to me, is like plants. They all have some sort of defense chemicals, different amounts. I don't know if what have the most or whatever, but
Mhm.
basically the idea is that like most plants don't want to be eaten. Others do, like the fruit of the plants want to be eaten, so that's why fruit is sweet, and that's why most plants are not sweet. And they have these defense chemicals to like prevent from being eaten, so that they can survive and evolve and continue on. But I don't know. I've heard that those. I don't know. What's your take on it?
I wouldn't get too caught up. I wouldn't lose sleep over defense chemicals.
Okay. Okay. Noted. That's noted. Um, okay. I think we've talked enough about animal-based diet now. That was the most common question we got, so I know we had to touch on it. What would be like an ideal macro ratio for somebody training for a marathon, let's say?
So I've actually, like, I like to move away from macros. You're gonna hear people say like 40 to 60% of your diet should be carbohydrates, 20 to 30% should be fat, 15 to 30% should be protein. But I feel like that doesn't really tell you much. You're just kind of like, okay, what do those numbers mean? Like, where do I fit in the range? Like, it's a good starting spot, I would say, to know like you should have more carbohydrates. and fat and protein should be divided between the rest of that. But in terms of specifics, like I wouldn't say 25% fat, 25% protein, 50% carbohydrates for everyone, because it's really what's your training plan, what are your goals, where are you starting, like what's your baseline. So instead, I like to think about carbohydrate intake through grams per kilogram. So say if you're running less than an hour, 1 hour a day, that might be like 3 to 5 grams per kilogram per day of carbohydrates. Versus maybe you're running for 3 to 4 hours a day. That would look like 6 to 10 grams per kilogram. So I like that more specific number. And then same with protein intake, generally speaking, 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram. And then fat intake, more or less 1 gram per kilogram. So I personally like that approach more for when I'm deciding how much carbohydrate, protein, and fat intake athletes should have, because I feel like that gives me a more specific amount versus saying 60% carbohydrate.
Right. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Would you recommend that people track their calories, track their macros, everything that they eat?
Yes and no. It's a great place to find your baseline. So I would generally recommend record 2 weekdays and a weekend day just to see what you're eating. I wouldn't recommend tracking every single day because it's tedious, and going back to sustainability, no one really wants to track what they're eating every single day. Like it just gets repetitive and it's not very enjoyable, truthfully. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
okay.
no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I think so many people are just obsessed with tracking. Like I've been with people and it's literally every single thing that they consume, they're just tracking it and putting it in their app, and it's like, oh, I have, I think this is the other bad thing that I've experienced with macros is like, oh, I have 30 grams of carbs left for today. Let's go to McDonald's and get a milkshake or whatever.
Yeah,
Like I think when people get so, this is just my personal opinion,
yeah,
it's like when people get so caught up in like the calorie counting and the macro counting, like they think that as long as they're hitting those numbers that they're doing it right, whereas like those calories and macros could come from anything.
yeah.
So that's just my personal take on it, and I don't know, just my opinion, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's like energy in, energy out, right? That's typically what people think about. And it's not the most accurate because our bodies adapt to what we give it. So say if we're chronically not eating enough, our bodies are going to adapt to that low energy state, and that can lead to a whole nother conversation about just how to fuel and eat around training. But it's really more energy availability and timing. So are you giving your body the food that it needs, the energy that it needs at the right time, versus thinking like all or nothing? I have 30 grams of carbs left. How do I make the most of that 30 grams, you know?
Exactly. How would you? I guess first question: do you think people should have like a rough daily caloric goal? And then second question would be, how should they go about determining what that goal should be?
So I wouldn't necessarily recommend someone to aim for a certain number of calories each day because every day is probably going to be a little different in terms of what their activity level looks like. Are they sitting more of the day? Are they standing? Are they on their feet during their job? Things like that. So I like to go off of how you feel and how is your energy levels? How is your mental concentration? Things like that, because we don't want to tie a number to our identity or say like I have to eat 2000 calories, but realistically like maybe some days I'm going to eat 1800, maybe some days I'm going to eat 2200. Like is that really making a huge difference in the grand scheme of things? No, not really. But if someone does want to know where to start, I would recommend them seeking help from a registered dietitian because like if we have a injury with our biomechanics or our muscles, we'd go see a physio, we'd go see a personal trainer for help. If we have some medical condition, we would go to a doctor for help. So if we're trying to find where to start with our diet, you would go to a dietitian for help.
That's the perfect answer. And I think you probably hate a lot of these questions because they're like one size fits all questions, and
Hmm.
none of the answers are one size fits all because nutrition is so complicated. It's so subjective. There's so many ways to do it, and like what like we talked about, what works for one person is likely not going to work for the next
Yeah.
person. So I think that's one of the biggest things I think I've gotten out of this, and getting more into nutrition and stuff. And what I think other people should recognize is like it's so subjective,
Yeah.
and you can't just see what somebody else is doing and try and implement. You can test it and try and implement it into your routine, but just know that it might not work, and you might have to adapt. And I think that it seems like you always kind of have to be adapting a little bit with your nutrition, like you said, based on your energy levels, based on or your activity levels, and what like season of life you're in, because
Hmm.
that's always changing, and because of that, your diet should probably always kind of be changing and evolving with you. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
what? Yeah. One of the questions we got was about eating for better sleep. I don't know
Hmm.
exactly what they meant by that. Maybe like if there are certain foods that are known to maybe help you sleep better, or maybe like the timing to help you sleep better at night as well.
Yeah, I would say the big thing would be timing. Like to say, avoid having large meals 2 hours before you go to bed. That gives your body time to digest it. Because if you say you do eat a large meal and just go straight to bed, you're probably going to just be laying in your bed with your eyes open trying to fall asleep just because your stomach is just working and keeping you awake. So, avoiding large meals roughly 2 hours before bed. And another thing is caffeine intake. So, are you having tea that may contain caffeine, but you aren't aware? And it's just kind of like your nighttime drink, but that's actually backfiring on you. Or are you having your coffee at 3 p.m. or afternoon? Because caffeine stays in our system for quite a while. So even though the caffeine buzz has worn off within an hour or two, it's still circulating through our blood and can directly impact our ability to fall asleep and stay asleep.
The half life of caffeine is like 12 hours, right? Again, I'm not a scientist, but that means like half of the caffeine is still in your system 12 hours later. Is that
Yep,
the right way to
exactly.
put that?
Exactly, yeah. So if you're
Okay, yeah. For
having,
for me, go ahead.
I was just saying, so if you're having coffee at 3 p.m. and you say you go to bed at 10 p.m., like even though it's been 7 hours, there's still going to be some caffeine circulating.
Would you recommend about noon cut off caffeine? That's what I typically do, but is there like a obviously it depends on what time you're trying to go to bed, I guess, right?
Yeah, definitely depends on what time you're going to bed, but noon is a good rule of thumb.
Are there I guess this kind of dips more into like neuroscience, I suppose, but would you recommend people take caffeine? Are there benefits? I will typically avoid caffeine before a run, just because from my understanding, it can increase your heart rate a little bit, which is not great for exercise because it's already going to be elevated. What's your take on caffeine around exercising?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of studies showing benefits of caffeine around exercise. However, caffeine tolerance is a whole nother story. And that's where some people have caffeine and they feel awesome. They feel great during their training. And then other people have caffeine and they're borderline having a panic attack because their heart rate's elevated. They like it's uncomfortable. So caffeine is really going to be individual and subjective. If you can tolerate it and you can time it with your training and you feel great, then that's awesome. But if you know that your body just does not like caffeine, then you're probably not going to feel those performance benefits that the research is saying.
Okay, I'm definitely more of the latter where I'm like borderline panic attack.
Yeah.
Like I've got too much energy. I'm super sensitive to it. So I typically avoid caffeine until after like I've done my run and all that. And then like, if I trying to be more productive during the day, I'll take it. But do you know if it elevates your heart rate, or is it even enough to like worry about, and maybe like the like cognitive energy that it gives you maybe outweighs that?
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with saying how much caffeine will elevate your heart rate and to what extent is that too much. In terms of the cognitive benefits, what caffeine does is it blocks this molecule called adenosine. Adenosine is what makes us feel tired. So, because it's blocking this molecule that makes us feel tired, we're going to feel more alert, we're going to feel more energized. However, once that caffeine wears off, that adenosine has still been building up as the caffeine's been blocking it. So that's why we often feel this crash after we have caffeine, is because the caffeine's no longer blocking the adenosine. And then all of the adenosine that's been building up is like, surprise, I'm here. And everyone just has that energy crash. But I will say caffeine is really just temporary energy. If you're really seeking sustainable long-term energy for your day, for your workout, that's where food and proper nutrition is going to come in.
Okay. Yeah, that's caffeine. I mean, it's literally a drug, and I think using it wisely and strategically.
Hmm.
It's hard to because it's who doesn't like coffee? Everybody has coffee, and so I don't know. I find that if I'm strategic with it, you can really use it to your advantage.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that crash is very real, and like even during like a race, it's more common I think with like ultra marathons, where like you're out there for 12 hours,
Hmm.
24 hours, where like a lot of people will use caffeine. Like if they're just for example, if they're doing a 100-mile race and they're out there for 24 hours, like they'll take it as it starts to get dark. But then if they don't continue taking the caffeine, then it's like the next morning, and then they have that crash because they've been taking all this caffeine. So that, like it's like once you start taking it, you have to keep taking it.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, went down a caffeine rabbit hole there. I'm sorry. We did get a question about gut microbiome and some recommendations on food
Hmm.
for better gut health. I hear a lot of people talk about like the gut microbiome. Do you kind of want to just explain some of what that is?
Yeah. So essentially, our gut is made up of a bunch of different types of bacteria, both good and bad. You're going to hear probiotics and prebiotics thrown around a lot relating to helping the good bacteria in our stomach. Probiotics, they introduce good bacteria into our gut. So think of fermented foods, miso, tempeh, kombucha, sauerkraut, things like that. And the prebiotics, they help feed the good bacteria in our stomach. So they work hand in hand with probiotics. And prebiotics are going to be in your more fibrous foods. So your fruits and veggies, whole grain, whole wheat options are going to give you the prebiotics. So when it comes to optimizing gut health, it's having a variety of food, having a mix of fruits and veggies every day, getting your whole grains, having some dairy products for the probiotics, and having some fermented foods if you can tie it in together. But I think the main thing is that, say you're hearing this and you're like, well, I don't eat like any of that. The goal isn't to start eating all of that at once because that's likely going to be too much for your stomach to handle. So with fiber, you can build up tolerance and increase small bits at a time so that you're training your gut to tolerate more. Because if you go from 0 to 100 with fiber, you're probably going to feel even more uncomfortable and bloated, and you're going to question if this is really helping your gut. So the main thing is train your gut, know the fiber tolerance, and especially around training, being careful with fiber intake.
Is there a certain timing you should strive for with that sort of stuff where it's like take the probiotics like on an empty stomach or after you eat? Is there any relevance to that?
Um, Not necessarily. I'm thinking more so from food sources versus like your probiotic tablet. But really, it's just incorporating that variety of food and having that evenly throughout your day. If you are taking a probiotic tablet, you can just take it with breakfast or take it with a meal. Um, yeah, not something to get too hung up on.
Okay. Interesting. And one thing I've heard on the gut microbiome is that uh, it'll obviously change depending on what
Hmm.
you're eating. And I can't remember. I think the analogy I heard was like if you consistently eat like fast food, let's just say like McDonald's or something, then your stomach and your like the bacteria in your gut will start sending signals to your brain that like, hey, we like that stuff, we want to eat more of it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can change that and like change those cravings coming from your gut microbiome based on like if you switch to eating just salads, like I think it said it was over like a 2 week period that over this week period, if you start eating salad versus fast food, then your stomach microbiome will change and then it'll start craving, sending signals to your brain of like, hey, we want more salad. Is there any truth to that or any merit to that?
Mm, I I can't say that it's directly tied to gut health. I think there's a lot of factors that come into play when we're talking about cravings. Usually people eat a lot of, say, just carbohydrates, and that doesn't really fill them up, so they want more, and that's where like the mindless snacking comes in. Whereas if you're eating a balanced meal, so you're having carbs with that protein with fat, then you're less likely to experience cravings, less likely to mindlessly eat in the future the rest of the day. So I can't say that cravings are directly tied to your gut health, but you're probably going to feel better eating your salad, eating whole or healthier foods versus eating fast food every single day. So it's it's an interesting one to talk about regarding our cravings and our gut.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of things. Sorry, my dog is being wild. I think there's obviously a lot of different connections between like our brains and our stomachs and all these different things, and so it's
Yeah.
there's probably multiple layers to it. What is your? I guess we kind of touched on it with like intermittent fasting, sort of. Is there any benefit to like avoiding snacks or incorporating more snacks throughout the day? I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear that or not. It's like banging this toy on the wall. Um, hey, sorry. Is there yeah, so like is snacking good? Is it bad? Because I hear a lot of people talking about like just eat two big meals a day, nothing else in between or after. What's your take on that?
I'm definitely a big fan of snacks. They are great for just helping maintain energy levels throughout the day. I find when I've worked with clients, they are doing that. They're eating 1 to 2 meals a day and they're saying how hungry they are at 4 p.m. And then that's when they just go home and eat pretty much whatever is in sight. The snacks are what help carry you throughout the day. So it's really knowing how to build a snack as well. I like to say carbohydrates and protein together because carbohydrates give your body the energy that it needs, and then protein gives you the satiety, gives you that satisfaction. So minimizing the mindless snacking afterwards.
Okay, so snacking is good. Okay, this is
Yep.
good to know. I love snacks, so again, very reassuring.
Snacks are good,
Um,
but we want to be strategic.
okay. What are some like snacks? I guess just general snacks you'd recommend? Because I feel like most snack food it's just like processed, like highly processed like protein bars or different things with just not great ingredients. Like what are some maybe healthy snack options you could recommend?
Yeah, so thinking again, pairing a carbohydrate with a protein. So a classic one is going to be Greek yogurt bowl with some cereal or granola and some berries on top, getting protein from the yogurt and then carbs from the berries and granola. Say a person wants something savory, you could do some tuna and crackers. You could do um, edamame, the little soybeans, and some rice crackers as well. Or you could do like a small sandwich or a small wrap with deli, turkey, and cheese. So you can really be creative with your everyday foods, and you don't always have to reach for like a protein bar, though they can be convenient if you are tight on time or have a hectic schedule.
I've got one more question for you. I guess should talk. I don't know. It's kind of related. I feel like it's always tied in with like the animal based type of stuff. But seed oils
Hmm.
and like the industrial seed oils I hear people talk about, like the sunflower oil, safflower oil, canola oil, vegetable oil, grapeseed, all these different types of like industrial oils.
Hmm.
Um, do you have an opinion, or what does the science say on some of that stuff?
So seed oils are anti-inflammatory. I know the what mass media is kind of saying is that they're really bad for you, but they are high in omega-3s, in your polyunsaturated fats, and those are the fats that we want to have in our diet, unsaturated ones. So seed oils shouldn't be avoided. I think sometimes they may get a bad rap, especially like if they're used in the commercial kitchen sense of like they're frying and that oil's reused over and over again, then they get a bad rap in that sense. But if we're just at home cooking, like canola oil is perfectly fine, sunflower oil is perfectly fine. So I think there's a lot of bad media surrounding them, but they don't need to be eliminated or removed from the diet.
Do you think if people had the option between like cooking with avocado oil or coconut oil or like an animal fat like ghee or tallow
Mhm.
or something, would they should they opt for one of those instead of a seed oil, or do you think that it doesn't matter either way?
So I would actually put avocado oil in a different category than like ghee or yeah, the animal fats, just because avocado oil has a really high smoke point, so it's great for cooking actually, and high in your unsaturated fats. Coconut oil and the animal fats, those are going to be higher in saturated fat, which is the kind of fat we want to minimize in our diet. Saturated fats have been linked to chronic disease risk, so we want to focus more on our unsaturated fats, which are going to come from the vegetables, the seeds. So avocado oil, olive oil, canola oil, all fine to cook with.
Okay, amazing. I think we covered all the questions that we got. One last question. Actually, I just thought of this. Um, Added sugars.
Yep.
Obviously, added sugars different from like fructose from fruit, or naturally
Hmm.
occurring sugars in fruit. What is your take on added sugars?
I actually love that you ask this because it just goes back to saying how general population recommendations are getting muddled with your athletic population recommendations. So for your general population, yes, we want to minimize our added sugar intake. Now for our athlete population, those added sugars, say Gatorade for instance, that's the purpose of the product, is to give you simple sugars for your body to break down during exercise. You're having sports drinks while you're exercising, while you're active, not when you're on the couch watching TV. So there is a time and place for added sugars for athletic populations, and it's just knowing when and how to implement them to maximize their benefit. Um, because they get such a bad rap from mass media and just from like your general health recommendations, a lot of athletes are scared to have Gatorade, are scared to have energy chews because they see sugar. They're like, oh, I don't want sugar. But our body breaks it down into glucose, which if you eat an apple, our body's going to break it down to glucose as well. And that's what our body's main source of fuel is going to be when we're exercising. So for the athlete, added sugars will help performance when used strategically around your training.
Okay, so that's like the I guess most gels that people use when they're running,
Hmm.
or like a powdered drink mix, like most of those, a Gatorade is an obvious example, like
Yeah.
loaded with sugar. Okay,
Hmm.
so that's good to know because I typically will avoid added sugars in like my day to day diet, but then I'll just like
Hmm.
shove like 60 grams of sugar through like a drink mix or something for a workout. So okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I think this has been really good. You provided a ton of information, answered a lot of really, really good questions that we got, and hopefully cleared up some things when it comes to diet and nutrition. there's still so many things that we could talk about, and just
Yeah.
going back and forth on studies and all these different things. And so yeah, but I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy. It was fun to have this chat.
Awesome. What's the best way for people to connect with you if they want to ask you questions or maybe work with you or something?
Yeah, so if they have any questions, they can reach out, probably through social media will be the best platform. So that'll just be on Instagram at Jen Ho Nutrition.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you again for coming on, and we'll see you later.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you in the next one.